I think what's happened in the past kind of, let's say, 5 to 10 years is that there has been a real surge of how the value of acting in games, of voiceover in games, and also performance in games in general. Audiences and gamers are really now attuned to very good digital performances. We have BAFTA awards for performer in a leading role, performer in a supporting role at the BAFTA Games Awards. Games like Baldur's Gate 3, where the performances, where the cast of Baldur's Gate 3 have developed this fan base, and people are really latched onto the performances and the acting and that. I think it's really the awareness of how much really great voiceover and really great acting in games can bring to a title and how much value you can add is really grown. I think the idea of that has really become, people are very much more keyed onto it than they were, like, say, 10 years ago.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of GameLogic Behind the Games. I've got a really, really fascinating guest for you today. Delighted to welcome Kirsty Gilmore from Sounds Wild. It's her company, and she is a voice and performance director who was very, very privileged to meet out at GDC. How are you, Kirsty?
I'm well, thanks, Mike. Thanks so much for having me on. This is really exciting.
Not at all. As I mentioned to you off camera, and if you've seen any of my previous episodes, what I really want to get out of this podcast is speak to people that have different skill sets, that work in different areas of gaming. And as I said to you when I met you in San Francisco in March, I've never met anybody who does voiceover within the gaming industry before, so I was really, really keen to get you on. So thanks so much for giving up your time. It's really kind of you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So first off, where in the world are you, Kirsty? Are you in the UK?
I am. I'm in Brighton. I would say sunny Brighton, but it's very overcast today. But I'm based in Brighton in the UK. I work across the world. I work for studios a lot in London. So I often go into London, but I also work internationally. I work for game studios and companies, localization studios, but also audio outsourcers based all around the world, mainly London and LA, but also wherever anybody needs me.
So I'm only slightly colder than you, being in London and not as far south as you are. It's overcast, rainy, glum, as is the usual. Often get guests from like sunny LA over, and yeah, I'm in London.
I wish this happens a lot when I have chats with people. They're like, "So where are you?" And I'm like, "I'm in the UK," and they're like, "Oh." What's that like? And I'm
sorry
like,
about that.
Yeah, and I'm like, it's overcast and raining. So yes, but we did have a thunderstorm last night, which was quite exciting.
Yeah, we got that as well. Not much sleep went on. So Kirsty, how I usually start these things is as I ask my guests to kind of talk about their journey, and I always kind of make some notes beforehand, and I went on your LinkedIn page and I was like, there is a lot on there. So I'm going to hand over to you, if that's all right. If you could pick out some of the highlights and talk about your journey and kind of leading right up to what you do now and what that entails, then we can go into that in a bit more detail, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's totally fine. So,
Awesome.
So I'm a voice and performance director for games, and I'm also a casting director for games, which essentially means that I direct actors doing voice performances, but also mocap and PCAP, performance capture performances for games. So that means I'm in a studio, in a VO recording studio, but I'm also in the volume, in mocap volumes, mocap stages as well. And I do a lot of work behind a computer, casting people and listening to a lot of and watching a lot of auditions and listening to a lot of auditions as well. I started off, so I'm originally from Aotearoa, which is New Zealand. I moved to the UK over 20 years ago now. And I started off in sound. I have kind of a combined background in theatre and performance and sound. And I got into games sort of down the VO route. Where I had been working for the BBC for a number of years, and then I was made redundant, or I took redundancy, actually, to be perfectly honest. And I was looking around for a way of kind of combining my skills, and my partner actually said, well, why don't you look at recording demos, voiceover demos, voice reels for actors, because it's a combination of your directing skills, of your acting skills as a voice actor, and I trained in performance, and your sound skills. So why don't you do that? So I started doing that under my business, Sounds Wild, and I really discovered the more I did it, that the more I really loved the directing side of things. And I started specializing in directing game characters and game voice reels and animation voice reels. And at the time, a background in directing, like I say, and I have done various bits of training in theatre directing, but there's no real way of getting into directing voice or voiceover or performance for games. Like, there's no traditional route. You can't go to a university and do a master's in directing for games. That doesn't exist. Yeah. So what I did was that I went and attended a lot of workshops as an actor, and went along and basically with other game directors, very big game directors for companies like Blizzard, and people who have directed really big, really, really big games, like the Battlefield games and things like that. And I went to these workshops and sat and watched how other people directed actors for games. And I took lots of notes. And then I went back and I started applying them for the opportunities that I got. And I started working on casting and directing really like demos for games, very small vertical slices, mobile games, a lot of pitches, a lot of games that I initially worked on don't exist anymore. They never got funding. That's fairly standard, isn't it? As one of the games I worked on, it disappeared so completely that not just the website domain disappeared, but the Gmail address disappeared altogether. So that completely went under. And so I started building up credits and experience working on really small, like micro indies and mobile games, like I say. And then and a lot of it was just very for mates, for people like, oh, Kirsty, actors, will you help us cast this? Could you also direct this? And then in sort of late 2019, early 2020, I got the opportunity to start working on Baldur's Gate 3 as a freelance voice and performance director, and then I did additional casting for that. And that's the biggest title I've done so far, just in terms of just sheer impact. We've all heard of Baldur's Gate 3. It's a little bit of an impact in the industry. And then once I started working on that, so I worked on that for almost 4 years, and alongside that I started to build up a lot more credits. That was kind of my way into finding who employed voice directors, performance directors, that kind of thing. So since then I've worked on Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 as a voice and casting director. I've worked on
not a bad one either.
So it's all right. Yeah, it's all right. Another small title, but it's not too bad.
Yeah, I think I've heard of it.
Yeah, a little bit of Call of Duty. And I've done a load of indie titles. I've directed big names in games like David Hayter and Jennifer Hale, big actors. I've directed and cast celebrities. I've done everything from like micro indies to really large games and kind of everything in between. So it's kind of, and I work as a freelance director for companies that hire me as a freelancer. I contract to game studios themselves. So if an indie studio comes and says to me, I'd really like casting services, like I want to put VO in my game, but I don't know how to do it. Or I want to put VO in my game and we know how to do it sort of, but we can't find it. We don't know how to find actors. And I will kind of plug into their pipelines and either provide like an end-to-end VO pipeline, or I will just come in and do casting for them and find them actors to do their VO, or I'll just come in and do directing for them and direct their VO or their PCAP, their performance capture, or their mocap, whatever they need. And talk them through that. So I do end-to-end dialogue consultancy, or I can do just a little bit of your VO or dialogue process. And I do a lot of talking to studios about whether they need VO or not. So it's kind of dialogue, VO, performance capture, acting for games is kind of my thing. And I also now teach acting for games at a drama school at university in Brighton to actors, which is pretty cool. Yeah.
So we could have probably gone through your journey and taken an afternoon to do that, I think. And just off of that, I've got so much here I had to stop writing because I'm not going to be able to get through it all. Okay. I'm going to pick out a few things if that's all right, Kirsty.
Sure.
Again, fascinating journey, and I love what a kind of relatively new skill set it is. And some people I've spoken to before have commented, like I spoke to an audio director who said, well, when I was growing up, when I was at college, I had to do audio design or maybe even game engineering, but there was no audio within gaming specialism really. And there is now. So hopefully maybe 15, 20 years we'll have that specialism, but right now we don't. I'd love to know, Kirsty, obviously you've been able to follow your passion of theatre, which is amazing. Did you always have a passion for gaming as well, or did you kind of fall into that as well? Did you naturally kind of go towards gaming?
I've always been a gamer. I know we don't say game player, a player of games these days. So I've played games since I was very young. My family personally didn't have game consoles, but we did. But friends did. So I've played. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, Myke, or how long I've been playing, because that will very much date me. Except
You're
to
still
say
in
that
your 20s, though,
yeah,
I think,
sure,
aren't you?
20s, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just a new thing. But just to say that my first game was actually DOS based. That was the first game. Okay. So to give you an idea, that'll date me enough, I think. So I was always really fascinated with the process. But I was just telling someone this the other day, that when I was growing up in New Zealand, like, games industry was Japan. That's where we thought that's where the games were made. So the idea of working in games was really like, that's not something I could ever do. It was never an idea that definitely when I was at university or at school, when I was doing sound, when I did a postgraduate in sound engineering, like the idea of doing sound for games, like your audio director that you interviewed, not something that was mentioned. So it didn't even occur to me that, and finding out that there was an actual job that people actually were not. I always knew, I knew people did directed actors for games, but I didn't realize that it was actually could be someone's job rather than just a skill, because you do get a lot of narrative designers and writers and sound designers who will also direct actors as part of their job, but it's more like a task than a job. Whereas this is my whole role. This is what I do, full time. So I do a lot of things, but but this is what I mainly do. And I didn't realize that could be a thing until relatively recently.
And I'll be honest, I've worked in the computer games industry for 6-7 years now. Like, I had no idea until I met you, and I was like, someone specializes in that role. That's awesome. And I'm sure that there's lots of people hopefully listening, maybe probably just my mum and dad, but that have far less knowledge in the industry than I do, that would definitely have no idea. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do these podcasts. I think that's a fascinating insight. So thanks so much.
No, you're welcome.
One thing that always stands out within gaming, in my opinion, compared to so many other industries, is very few people seem to say, I just fell into it. I wasn't passionate about it. I kind of fell into it. It's almost the opposite in gaming. Like, pretty much every kind of discipline, every person from every kind of skill sets, I love doing this, and I managed to marry it up with my love of games, which is so unique about our industry, I think.
I totally agree. I think it's when I realized that this could be a job, that this is something that people could do, I was like, oh, great. So I've always played games. I've always done this. And now I can use all my skills, and it just felt like a real coming together. Not to say that it wasn't kind of like, I obviously worked really hard at it to get opportunities and and I still work really hard on it, to make those opportunities happen. But yeah, I think I do occasionally, I meet people who like, I fell into this, but generally I meet people who like, I really wanted to do this, and this is the way I go after it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so obviously this is an area that's evolving, which is fantastic. But, in general, what's the market like for voiceover professionals within gaming? Is it something that studios really, really struggle with, or they might have people wearing certain hats, as you alluded to previously, kind of just covering that area of game and casting? Or is it really something that's starting to take off now?
I think, there's a lot of work, especially in the UK, but also in the US, is done by studios outsourcing studios who specialize in audio for games. So you'll find outsourcers who do just dialogue for games, just VO for games, or just performance for games. So they'll cover dialogue, they'll cover VO, and they'll cover mocap and PCAP as well. So the idea of that, and some of these studios have been around for a long time, 20 years or so, and just the because there has been, VO in games has been around for a long time. So I think there's a lot of like and those are some of the main studios that I work for. They're outsourcing studios, and they provide dialogue services for games, essentially. And that's been around for quite a while. I think what's happened in the past kind of, let's say, 5 to 10 years, is that there has been a real surge of how the value of acting in games, of voiceover in games, and also performance in games in general. People are really audiences and gamers are really now attuned to very good digital performances. We have BAFTA awards for performer in a leading role, performer in a supporting role at the BAFTA Games Awards, and games like Baldur's Gate 3, where the performances, where the cast of Baldur's Gate 3 so have developed this fan base, and people are really latched onto the performances and the acting, and that I think it's really the awareness of how much really great voiceover and really great acting in games can bring to a title, and how much value you can add I think is really grown. I think the idea of that has really become, people are very much more keyed onto it than they were, like, say, 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's cool. It's super exciting. You probably noticed this week in the run up to this episode, you've had a stalker called Myke Parrott looking at your LinkedIn profile a lot. And one thing I noticed, Kirsty, and I was really keen to ask you, and hopefully you're not you don't mind talking about it, is, and I know you've had lots of speaking gigs, and you spoke at GDC and Rennes previously, but you got a lot of awards. Can you talk to us about some of those?
I mean, some of them are actual awards. I mean, it wasn't an award, but probably one of the things I'm most proud about is being selected for the BAFTA Breakthrough Program in 2021.
That's pretty big. Like,
that's pretty big. Cool. It was pretty cool. It was pretty cool. Yeah.
That's really cool. Kirsty,
yeah. So the BAFTA Breakthrough Program is like a program where they select 20 applicants from across film, TV, and games, and you apply. And you apply because you feel it's your breakthrough moment. And so when I applied in 2021, it was the first time they'd had a voice director for games selected. So that was really great. And I feel very thankful for BAFTA, because they've been a real supporter of my work, and they're a really known quantity in games. They're very. The BAFTA awards, are really, they're the only major games awards that aren't publicly voted for, just in terms of the whole awards aren't publicly voted for. But in terms of the other awards I've won, I won a lot of awards for, like, directing demos, a lot of voiceover type awards, but they're very industry focused awards. Like, nobody's heard of them outside of the voiceover industry, so I kind of keep those in the down low. But it's the BAFTA Breakthrough wasn't technically an award, but it is a pretty prestigious program, and I'm really pleased about it.
Kirsty, the only award I've won was when I won a Pizza Hut eating competition when I was 16. I don't think I've had any others, so you trumped me by some significant margin.
I don't believe that for the slightest, but
depends who you ask.
Exactly. But also, those things don't come easy. Those Pizza Hut.
I did put it on my CV when I was younger. Actually.
Oh, why not? When you're 16, you don't have that much of a CV, so I think I'd add everything.
So, Kirsty, if you don't mind, take a few minutes to talk us through, and I'm sure it changes project to project, day to day, but what would a typical day involve for you? What would some of your key responsibilities be when you engaged on a project?
Okay, so basically, say depending on the project, often we book recording sessions in a block. So leading up to, like, a day, I will have done prep for that day's recording sessions. I will know exactly what actors are coming in, what scenes they were doing. I will have reviewed the script for those days, reviewed the characters, made any notes, asked any questions of the devs to see what scenes we needed to capture. If it's a large project, and so something like Baldur's Gate 3, I did a lot of, I'd ask if there's anything priority we needed to do. And then my day in the studio itself is making the actor comfortable. Explaining to them what we're doing. If they're new to the game, giving them a synopsis of the game, telling them what it's about, finding out a little bit more about them, and then, getting the lines recorded. And really, the process of directing an actor kind of depends quite heavily on the actor's experience. If they're very experienced with games, it'll be a faster process. If they're brand new to games and they've never done a game before, but they've got a lot of theatre experience or film and TV experience, then it's about explaining how games work, what we do in games, why we're recording using a spreadsheet. do a lot of that. So sometimes I work with sort of 2 actors in a day, like one in the morning, one in the afternoon. Sometimes I might have a different actor every hour. So it's kind of depending on how long what we're recording, the nature of it, how big their characters are. And it's my job to make an actor feel safe, emotionally and physically, safe enough to explore, so that to make sure they've got all the information they need to then create the character, and then we work on that together. There's a lot of liaison within the client, the developers, whoever's on the line. Often they'll be down the line. Sometimes on bigger projects where I've worked with the developers before, they trust me to kind of just get on with it. But there's often, depending on how big the project is, if I'm directing something like a trailer, there's usually about 5 or 6 different people down the line, because there's people from publishing and people from marketing and people, and everybody wants their own, has their own take on things, and that's totally fine. So that's my job as a director, to balance all the viewpoints and to kind of act as a translator between the devs, who have created the game and written the game and have a very specific idea of what they want, and the actors who don't speak dev. So the dev don't speak actor, and the actors don't speak dev. So if a dev says, something about it's an RTS game, that means absolutely nothing to the actor unless they play games. If we talk about cutscenes, that might mean absolutely nothing to the actor if they're not familiar with that. So a lot of it is my job to kind of translate what the devs want into what the actor needs to hear to get that performance. There's a lot of that. In between times, I often do a lot of work on the train on the way back and forth. I'm usually working on about 5 projects at the same time at different stages. So if I'm directing in the studio, I've usually got maybe casting for another one, pre-production for another one. I'm doing a lot of emailing at the moment. So I've just finished one big game, which we're about to go back in and do some more recording for. I've got 2, maybe 3 casting projects, prep for an animated series, prep for another 2 games. Yeah, a lot of my job is kind of balancing things and making sure people have things at different times. I often have a lot of evening meetings, and I might have an evening session. So I might have UK, and then I might go home and do 4 hours directing in the evening for LA time for a completely different game. So it's really, really varied. Like, because I'm a contractor and a freelancer, I don't work on any one, I don't work for one studio. I work for a lot of different studios, and some of them are AAA and some of them are AA and some of them are micro indie, and they've all got different needs. So
I imagine some of those recording days could be, varied, but I imagine they could be pretty intense and long by the sounds of things.
Yeah, they're just kind of, sometimes, like, I think the most different games I've ever directed in one day is about 6. Because there was a day where I just had 6 different games, and they're all different things, like pickups for one, 2 characters for another, a trailer for another one, but it was 6 different games. So that's 6 different styles to get my head around, 6 different sets of clients, 6 different kind of approaches, because directing a trailer is very different from like pickups for an established character, and they're all very different games. Some of them were barks, some of them were narrative games, some of them were RPGs, so that can be quite challenging, but that's part of my job as well. So I get to work, and one of the great things about my job is that I do get to work on a lot of different types of games, not just one. I get to work on huge fantasy RPGs, and I get to work on first-person shooters, So it's
I
all pretty
imagine you get
cool.
to meet some seriously interesting people as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I know, I knew before you mentioned what you do in a nutshell, but I know you've worked on loads of different projects, loads of different games. Is there any in particular that really stands out as your favourite, and is there a reason why?
If I don't mention Baldur's Gate 3, then somebody will be like, why? But aside from the fact that Baldur's Gate 3 is really special to me, because it's the game I've worked on for the longest period of time. It was almost 4 years I worked on it. I got to really, really know the actors well, and I think it was really special in terms of what Larian were trying to achieve and how much care and time people were putting into it. Not that the games I work on don't have a lot of care and time. All the games I work on, with the exception of a couple that I won't talk about, you're pretty sure that people, everybody's putting their hearts and souls into it for different reason. But I guess it was just such a massive game. It is a massive game, and there was we got to direct so many extremes. There's comedy in it, there's romance, but there's heartbreak and trauma and violence and blood and guts and everything in between. And I got to work with a lot of different actors, and it was directing mocap as well as voice, and so that was really special to me. At the moment, I'm working on a game called The Quiet Things, which is a micro indie game, and it's about a girl's journey, her life story through various mental health issues, but also through homelessness and other challenges that she faces along the way. And it's based on real diaries written between the ages of 8 to 17. So that's quite a challenging. It's a challenging game. There's a lot of trauma in it. There's a lot of very, very sensitive themes. It's a micro indie, so we're doing it on a really super low budget. But that's been really, really good to work on. And I did a talk of that was the talk I did at GDC was on dealing with sensitive content. How do you work with sensitive content, not only when you're directing actors, but also devs? How do devs handle working with really sensitive content, like content around suicide and content around abuse? How do you deal with that? How do we safeguard our teams in games when you're working on content that's very, very heavy and very raw, and you're doing it over and over again? Because unlike linear content, like a film or TV, with games, you go back and back and back, and so it's kind of, it's really, yeah. So I'm pretty passionate about welfare and mental health. And making sure that everybody is supported, because we work on it's really tough stuff. So The Quiet Things is really where it's on. I think there's a demo available on Itch at the moment, and we're looking. It's been at various. It was at WOSD recently in the UK. We're going to give a talk about it at Develop. If anybody is coming to Develop in July, we're doing a talk. See you there. So that's those are two of them. But Myke, I could talk about there are some games that, like anybody who's worked on huge amounts of titles, there are some games that you're like, I'm never talking about that. That was a thing that happened, and I'm never talking about it again. But most of the games I've been lucky enough to work on have all taught me something in some way. Whether and it doesn't matter what they are. I don't mind. They don't have to be, serious. They can be. I've worked on fun, silly games. I've worked on comedy games. I've worked on games that are all barks, and I've worked on stuff like Call of Duty, which is which definitely it was a really interesting title to work on, because I'd never worked on milsim, on military simulation before. So that was a whole, not on that kind of serious level. That was a whole different thing of how those big games, those big series, how they get made.
Your brief story about The Quiet Things sounds fascinating, by the way. So I'm definitely going to come and hear you talk at GDC, and I'm going to look out for that as well. That sounds really emotionally challenging, but I imagine very, very rewarding. So yeah, huge kudos to you and the whole team involved in that. I'm definitely going to look out for that.
Thanks, Myke.
The last question I always ask is around kind of what titles that might be either imminent this year that you're looking forward to playing, or might have been recently released. Like, for me, I'm definitely going to look out for The Quiet Things. But is there anything else that's due for imminent release or coming out later in the year that you're looking forward to?
That I've worked on personally, or just games
not
that
necessarily,
I'm
just anything that you'd like. And it could be something you're working on, and that's absolutely fine as well.
Okay, I'm going to plug Luna Abyss, because it is a title that I did the voice and casting direction for. Okay. So Luna is an Luna Abyss, which is a first-person shooter sci-fi title that's coming out. It looks amazing. Okay. And it's been around. I think there might be a demo out at the moment, but that's been around at WOSD, and it was at Reboot, and it's been showcased at things. I don't know the release date of that, but I know it's being at some point, so it'll be coming out at some point. Awesome. Anything that I'm personally looking forward to. I mean, like I don't know about you, but I just getting time to play games is pretty 100%. Is pretty tricky.
So for me, like my list now is like a backlog. So I only just got got onto Helldivers 2, and now I need to get into Manor Lords.
Oh, I know, and
I got the heads up on that early, and I was like, just haven't had the chance. But yeah, I'm with you on that. I've got a backlog for sure.
Yeah, there's just so much. I mean, Tales of Windrush will come out at some point. I don't know when that's coming out, but I'm looking forward to that because I know the writers on that.
Oh, nice.
I'm looking. I'm just trying to think. Like, God, I see so many. When I was at GDC, you see so many great titles. You're like, oh, amazing! Oh, amazing! Oh, I need to have a look at that. Yeah. So, I love playing anything. Oh, Mythwrecked, that comes out. Polygon Treehouse. It's I think it's Mythwrecked. But it's that's been made by another person from another one of my cohort, if you like, from BAFTA Breakthrough. Cool. So that's pretty there. I think it's. I'm now checking just in case I get that wrong. Oh yeah, it is from Poly Treehouse. Yeah. So Mythwrecked is going to come out at some point, and I'm really excited by that because it's by the same people who made Roki, and they're just they're really fun adventure, lovely indie games. I'm a big fan of I will play your very, very big games. I have worked obviously on very, very big AAA games, but I will always have a really soft space in my heart for indies titles. And frankly, anyone who makes a game, Myke, because making games is really difficult. So any game, I read years ago, just to get any game released takes such a monumental effort in this kind of, especially this kind of climate. So kudos to anybody who has made a game and is releasing it, whatever level you're doing. If you have released a game and you found an audience and you've put your heart and soul into it, I think that's amazing.
Absolutely.
I love games. I love playing games in general. I love any sorts of games. I particularly love survival games. I don't know why. I'm just really like survival games. Kudos to anyone making games out there. I have a very small part in making those happen, and I'm really, really happy and privileged to be part of our industry.
Fantastic. Kirsty, that is a lovely note to end on. You've been an amazing guest, so interesting. I could carry on asking questions all day, but thank you so much for taking some time out of your very, very busy schedule to come and talk to me. You've been amazing.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me, Myke.
No problem. And I shall see you very soon at Develop, I hope.
Yes, no, absolutely.
Take care. All the best.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.